question 7. And so the student asks, Manasa roga kahahu samujhai. What are the diseases? Roga is disease. Manasa roga. What are the diseases of the mind? The discussion is very interesting because the teacher uses a very medical terminology in answering and in speaking to this question. So the question today is, what are the diseases of the human mind? Moha sakala vyadina karamula tinate puni upajahi bahusula. Moha sakala vyadina karamula tinate puni upajahi bahusula. काम बात कफलोभ अपारा क्रोध पित नित छाती जारा काम बात कफलोभ अपारा क्रोध पित नित छाती जारा श्री राम जय जय रामा Shri Ram Jaya Jaya Rama. So the teacher here is obviously very familiar with the traditional system of Indian medicine or Ayurveda. And I found it very interesting that he answers this question by drawing from the terminology, from the language of this ancient medicinal system. So he says that, and in the Ayurveda system, Ayurveda is a holistic medical system based on the central notion of balance. So balance is regarded as health, and imbalance is disease or illness. So there are three basic energies in this system of Ayurveda, three basic energies. There is Vata, Kapha, and Pitta. And Vata is associated with movement, is the energy associated with movement. Pitta with the metabolic system, and Kapha with structure, bones, muscles, etc. So when these exist in balance, there is good health. And when, as I said, there is imbalance, then the result is ill health. So he says that in the mind, greed, kama, is vata. Then kama vata, lobha, kapha. So greed for the senses, sensual greed is vata. Then greed for wealth, for power, for fame that's lobha. Kama vata, then lobha kapha is kapha, and krodha or anger is pitta. So when these three dominate the mind and they're active in the mind, then he says, this is a diseased mind. But what I want to emphasize this morning is how he begins this answer. So he lists these three as diseases of the mind, but he begins his answer with the sentence, Moha sakala vyadina karamula. But the root, these are symptoms, right? So the three are symptoms, but the fundamental cause, the root of these symptoms, he says, is ignorance, and for which he uses the word moha. Moha sakala vyadhina karamula. The root cause of all of these, of greed, of anger, etc., the root cause is ignorance, avidya or moha. Moha sakala vyadhina karamula. So the question for us is, what is this avidya about which he speaks? Why does he identify avidya as the principal illness as the principal disease of the mind, from which comes greed, anger, etc. Now, the different traditions of Hinduism, different Hindu traditions have described this avidya, this ignorance, in different ways. But they also have a certain consensus. They have a certain common voice in defining it or in characterizing it. And basically, they've all agreed that at the heart of this avidya, the primary disease of the human mind, at the heart of it, at the core of it, is a false understanding, a wrong understanding of ourselves as human beings. False understanding of oneself is at the core or the heart of avidya. And what is this false understanding? To put it simply, avidya is the false understanding that we exist separately from everyone and from everything else. It is the false understanding of separate existence. And most specifically, it is our failure to understand our relatedness, or our interrelatedness, if you prefer. And especially our relatedness to the one infinite source from which everything has come, by which everything is sustained, and to which everything returns. For the great teacher Shankara, whose birth anniversary we actually celebrated last week, this ignorance is our inability to understand our oneness, our unity, our identity at the deepest level with the infinite Brahman. So for Shankara, the great teacher, he gives special importance to those Upanishad teachings called the great sentences, Mahavakyas, that speak to our unity with the infinite one, like Ayam Atma Brahma. This Atma is one with Brahman. For another one of our great teachers, Ramanuja, it is not understanding, it is understanding that we are inseparable from, we are connected with, we cannot be separate from the one, and we are totally dependent on that one. So Ramanuja puts the emphasis on our inseparability from the infinite one and our complete dependence on that one. But as you can see, for both of them, what is avidya, what is wrong knowledge, is not seeing our interconnectedness with that one and with each other. Failure to understand our interrelatedness, believing in separate existence. So in the Hindu tradition, therefore, if we understand avidya to be ignorance of interrelatedness, especially how we are connected with the infinite one, the infinite Brahman, then naturally, right knowledge, vidya or jnana, is always associated, whatever text you look at, right knowledge, samyak jnana, is always associated with an understanding of our unity, understanding our interconnectedness, our relatedness. And I can give you so many examples of this. I know so many of you are familiar with the Bhagavad Gita, so I will give you an important example from the 18th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, where Sri Krishna speaks about the highest knowledge, about the best knowledge of ourselves and our world. And this is what he says. Sarvabhuteshu yenaikam bhavam avyayamikshate. Sarvabhuteshu yenaikam bhavam avyayamikshate. Avibhaktam vibhakteshu tajnanam vidhi satvikam. Avibhaktam vibhakteshu tajnanam vidhi satvikam. Sri Krishna Sharanam Mama. Sri Krishna Sharanam Mama. Sri Krishna Sharanam Mama. Sri Krishna Sharanam Mama. So speaking of knowledge, here, this is towards the end of the Bhagavad Gita, 18th chapter. He says, Sarva bhuteshu yenaikam bhavam avyayam ikshate avibhaktam vibhakteshu tad jnanam vidhi satvikam. So what is the best knowledge? Sarva bhuteshu, all, within all beings, yena. It is that knowledge, yena, sarva bhuteshu, that knowledge by which we see, when we see, we look at all beings, or we look at the totality of existence, what do we see? Ekam bhavam avyayam. We see a connectedness. We see the imperishable avyayam, the one imperishable being present in and connecting everything that exists. Avibhaktam vibhakteshu. Avibhaktam, the undivided, the unbroken, the undivided one, connecting everything that appears to be separate and different. So we see connectedness, we see everything rooted in and existing in the one. That is jnanam, that is vidya. That is the opposite of avidya. And he also, after speaking of what is true knowledge, of course, naturally he also clarifies what is avidya. And there he says, pritaktvena tu yad jnanam nana bhavan pritak vidhan veti sarveshu bhuteshu tad jnanam vidhi rajasam. Pritaktvena, separate, unconnected, separate existence. When one sees everything existing separately and nothing, there's no connection between one human being and another human being, with human beings and the world of nature, with human beings and the universe, everything is seen as unconnected, existing separately. Pritaktvena tu yad jnanam, nana bhavan pritak vidhan, nana bhavan, everything, pritak vidhan, existing separate from everything else, with walls, everything enclosed in walls, like a prison, everything in a separate a cell. Sarveshu bhuteshu tat jnanam rajasam. So it's an inferior. This is an inferior way of seeing. And I think in this contrast, we get a very clear picture of what is avidya and what is vidya. And you'll find this, these themes of relatedness and unrelatedness to be at the heart of this distinction. So although the Hindu tradition on the whole identifies avidya as the root problems, mula, as the teacher says, mula sakala, the root problem, although the Hindu tradition identifies avidya as the root problem, we should not take this lightly. The consequences of avidya are significant. It does not minimize. To speak of the fundamental root human problem as a problem of avidya is not to minimize the significance of this problem. The consequences of avidya are significant. They are long-lasting. They run deep. And just to very briefly clarify this, let me just for one moment turn to the Upanishads. Start with the Ramayana. I shared with you a couple of verses from the Bhagavad Gita, but to illustrate the depth of this avidya problem, let me just share with you something from the Upanishads. And I want to introduce what the Upanishads refer to as, in the expression, Hridaya Granthi. Hridaya Granthi. Hridaya means the heart, and the Granthi is a knot, the knot that you tie with a rope. So the Upanishad uses this expression, Hridaya Granthi, the knots of the heart by which we are bound, by which we lose our freedom, by which we are imprisoned and trapped. And it speaks about three knots of the heart. The Hridaya Granthi in the Upanishads are three knots of the heart. And it will not surprise you also to learn there that the first knot, the primary knot, the mula, the root of all knots is in the Upanishads, avidya. Avidya is the primary knot of the heart. And the text speaks of avidya, kama, karma. Avidya, kama, karma. So avidya is the primary knot, and then you have, following avidya is kama or greed, and then karma or greedful actions. Ignorance, greed, greedful actions. So here also you find that the first knot is avidya, which is, as I said already, is ignorance of our relatedness, our unity. And this ignorance causes within us a sense of lack, a sense of want, a sense of insecurity, a sense of anxiety, a sense of dissatisfaction with oneself. And in order to overcome this sense of lack, want, dissatisfaction within ourselves, we multiply desires. We multiply desires and we become victims of karma or greed. So avidya, the consequence of avidya, the knot of avidya is the knot of karma or greed. And naturally, this leads to karma or greedful actions. The three knots of the heart, avidya, karma, karma. But it's important also, I should just very quickly clarify that in the Hindu tradition, we always distinguish between greed and need. And this again comes to the Bhagavad Gita. It's a very beautiful line in the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where Sri Krishna says, Dharma viruddho bhuteshu kamosmi bharatarshava. I am desire, kamosmi, I am desire that is not in contradiction with, that is not opposed to virtue or to dharma. So when we are speaking here, we're not speaking about legitimate human needs. We're speaking about greed, because the Bhagavad Gita commends the legitimate human needs in a line like the one that I quoted. Dharma aviruddho, those desires that are not opposed to virtue or dharma are approved in the Bhagavad Gita. The problem, avidya doesn't lead to needs, avidya leads to greed. And that's what we're talking about here. And so these knots of the heart are destructive. That's why Tulsidas speaks of them as diseases of the mind. They eventually culminate in self-destruction, in the disintegration of personality. And I'm sure, there's so many beautiful verses in the Bhagavad Gita that indicates, how one descends from greed to self, from the ladder of descent from avidya to greed to self-destruction, pranashyati. I think it is important today to see these teachings that we are discussing, whether it's the Ramayana, the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, in a wider context. And while we are speaking, of the problem of avidya at the individual level, the knots of the heart, I want to emphasize that we should also see these, of course, as challenges for us as individuals, but I think it's also important that we see these knots of the heart, these diseases, as also infecting institutions, as infecting corporations, as infecting nations. Institutions, corporations, nations can also become victims of ignorance, avidya, and greed, with all of their destructive consequences. So there is a social dimension. We can speak of avidya at the individual level, with the individual dimension in mind, but I think it will be falling short if we don't also see the largest social implications of all of these. So when institutions or corporations become subject to avidya, and subsequently to the knot of avidya and then to the knot of greed, what happens? They put profits before human well-being. They become sources of suffering, of dukkha. They fail to be committed to the common good. Even as an individual who is subject to the avidya, fails to be compassionate, fails to think of the well-being of others. This also happens to institutions, to corporations, and even to a nation. So corporate ignorance, institutional ignorance, national ignorance leads to social suffering. We know very well, today in our world that we have the resources in our world to solve its major problems. We have the resources in our world to feed everyone, to educate everyone, to provide decent living for people across the world. But what we lack is the moral will. So the problem is a moral problem. It is not the absence of resources. It's a moral challenge. And this is why, texts like these that we're discussing speaks so powerfully to our context, to our reality. So under the conditions of ignorance, whether as individuals or corporations, we don't see how our well-being is linked to the well-being of all. Again, just one line, the Bhagavad Gita speaks very beautifully. Parasparam bhavayantaha sreya paramavapsyasi. Parasparam bhavayanta sreya paramavapsyasi. Parasparam bhavayantaha. It's a very beautiful expression. It means only by caring for each other. Parasparam bhavayantaha. Only by nurturing each other, only by taking care of each other. Parasparam bhavayantaha sreyo paramavapsyasi. That human communities will flourish. Only by caring for each other. Only by attending to the needs of each other in the 3rd chapter. Parasparam bhavayanta sreya paramavapsyasi. But I want to end this morning on a note of optimism, because all that I've said so far may be construed as speaking of avidya, one can't help but emphasize the problem. So I want to end on a note of optimism. When we speak in the Hindu tradition of the fundamental human problem, as we have seen in the Ramayana, in the Bhagavad Gita, in the Upanishads, as a problem of avidya, what we are also saying is that human nature is fundamentally good. There is nothing intrinsically broken in human nature. We are optimistic about human nature. There is a problem, and this problem can be overcome. So if there's a problem and the problem can be overcome, naturally it lends itself to a certain kind of optimism. So there is a problem of avidya, but what our tradition teaches and why it stands today is because it says that this problem can be overcome. There is a solution. And because there is a solution, the tradition is at its heart an optimistic tradition. Avidya can be overcome. And the knots of the heart can be loosened once the primary problem is addressed. And when the knots of the heart are loosened, then we ourselves are transformed. If avidya has consequences, knowledge also has consequences. And knowledge is also transformative of us as individuals, and knowledge can also transform corporations and institutions and nations. But we have to be awakened. We have to transform our fundamental way of thinking. We have to emphasize the values of unity and interrelatedness and not separation and difference. We have to change our self-understanding. We have to change our institutional culture. And when that happens, then of course avidya is replaced by vidya or jnana. Karma or greed is replaced by daya or compassion, and karma or greedful actions by loka sangraha, by committing ourselves to the well-being of all. And by moving from an ethics of separateness to an ethics of interdependence. And this requires deep understanding. This requires the wisdom, which at heart is what the Hindu tradition seeks to offer. So with these words, I will stop here this morning, give you a moment to think before we come to your questions or your comments on today's discussion. I would like to invite Kavindra and Kushal, Sahabir, who are joining us from New York, to offer us a bhajan at this point in our...
There we go. Namaste Guruji, Namaste Guruma. Yeah, as Guruji told us, we'll be presenting a bhajan this morning. Kushal, my brother, is on tabla. My dad is on harmonium. And I'll be singing. We're gonna present the bhajan Ramaka Gunagan. राम गुण सुमिरन रतन धन राम गुण सुमिरन रतन धन मन चिता को कर विभूषित मनुजता धनवान करिए ध्यान धरिए राम का गुणगान करिए राम का गुणगान सगुण ब्रह्म स्वरूप सुंदर सगुण ब्रह्म स्वरूप सुंदर सुचल रंजन भूप सुखकर सुचल रंजन भूप सुखकर राम आत्मा राम आत्मा राम का सम्मान करिए ध्यान धरिए राम गुणगान करिए राम का गुणगान करिए राम प्रभु की भद्रता का सभ्यता का ध्यान धरिए ध्यान धरिए राम का गुणगान करिए राम का गुणगान करिए राम का गुणगान. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kavindra and Kushal and Anand, for your beautiful Ram Bhajan this morning. And our satsang also has this a few moments now for your own responses or questions or what you would like to share before we conclude. So when you want to speak, you can unmute your microphone for your question this morning.
I was very intrigued by one aspect of your presentation. We are very accustomed to distinguishing between the mind and the heart, and they are often actually put in opposition to one another. But your thesis was that the fundamental diseases of the mind are knots in the heart. And I thought that was an absolutely wonderful message.
That's very beautifully put, Professor, this morning. It's so true because, you know, we have I didn't say that, but your question leads me to just make that brief comment that in the Hindu tradition, you know, we use in Sanskrit, we use the word antakarana, the inner instrument for both the mind and the heart. And yes, the Hridaya Granthi are the knots of the heart, which have their roots in this phenomena of ignorance. But I think you open up a very interesting unity there, the unity of the mind and the heart and the inseparability when we're talking about an issue like this. It reminds me also that, and I don't want to go too much into it, you know, but Mahatma Gandhi also appreciated very deeply that for him, the whole method of non-violence was not so much intended to change the mind, but to change the heart, to unblock, to loosen the knots of the heart. Because he also felt that unless the knots of, it's a very interesting symbiotic situation, unless the knots of the heart are loosened, even the mind is entrapped, even the mind is imprisoned. So I think that's a really interesting comment that requires a lot of further thought and explication. Thank you for that.
Namaste, Guruji. Okay, we had a question. You know, based on your discourse and everything, we're thinking, you know, where does the mind truly reside? You know, like conventional science, modern medicine tells us, you know, it's all in the brain. But you know, what would Hinduism say? What would Hinduism say as to where the mind truly resides?
So very, again, you know, very profound question. To give a very brief answer, Kavindra, the Hindu tradition, of course, acknowledges, you know, in looking at what we speak of as human anthropology, which is the constitution or the makeup of the human being. There is the physical body. You know, in Sanskrit, we speak of this as sthula sharira, the physical body composed of matter that can be seen, touched, heard, felt, etc. But we speak also of subtle energies or subtle matter. In this case, we speak of a sukshma sharira or a subtle body, and also very different from this physical and the subtle bodies. We speak of this fundamental reality or truth that I named this morning as Brahman. So the physical body, which includes the physical brain, is the instrument of the mind, is the instrument of the self, but not identical with it. So the mind belongs essentially in our Hindu tradition to what we speak of as the subtle body, sukshma sharira, that functions through the physical body. But both of these, subtle body, including the mind, and physical body, including the physical brain, none of these can function, or in fact, none of these can be without the infinite Brahman, Sachidananda Brahman, which is the ground that makes all life possible, whether it's physical life or mental life. But we do not, to answer your question very simply, the mind belongs to the subtle body or sukshma sharira, but we do not equate the mind fully, although there's this very deep relationship, but we don't equate the mind entirely with the person's physical being or the physical body, or what you call in Sanskrit the sthula sharira. Just a concise answer to your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Guruji.
You're welcome.